Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to a new webinar, number 6 of this 22nd series of pre-modern Islamic manuscripts. So we are hosting here at the Institute of Iranian Studies in the Austrian Academy of Sciences. My name is Bruno De Nicola. I am the PI of the project No Man's Land, in which we look at explore pre-modern manuscripts in trying to find from new information on the cultural history of Iran and Central Asia in the 13th and 14th century. Today, we're going to have an invited moderator. So I'm going to be very quick and only say a few words about how we're going to conduct the webinar. Basically, our speaker will have between 40 and 45 minutes for her lecture. And then we will have questions and answers at the end. You can use either the chat, the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, or you can also raise your hand and we can allow you to participate in, and you can speak or ask your question in your own voice if you prefer as well. So I think that's all I have to say today. So I will pass without further ado to Hadel Jarada, who will be moderating today's webinar. Hadel, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Hello, everyone. My name is Hadil Jarada. I'm a research fellow with the Nomads Manuscripts Landscape Project at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and it's a pleasure today to introduce Dr. Brinkmann. Dr. Stefanie Brinkmann is a research fellow at the Bibliotheca Arabica project at the Saxon Academy of Sciences and Humanities in Leipzig. She was acting professor at the universities of Freiburg, in Breisgau, and Hamburg. She has also been an active member and board member of the Islamic Manuscript Association since 2008. Her main interests are Hadith manuscripts and Hadith commentary as part of the larger field of commentary literature. She has recently published an article on marginal commentaries in Hadith manuscripts, and she also has a very important forthcoming publication in a volume edited by Zabina Shmitka and Hassan Ansari. The volume is titled Yemeni Manuscript Cultures in Peril, where she writes about a Bukhari manuscript from Timurid Shiraz that reached Yemen by the 16th century. She also has 2 forthcoming volumes that are of great interest, one edited together with Joel Bletcher on Hadith commentary, and another with Boris Librans on marginal commentaries in Arabic manuscripts. Her ongoing book project is dedicated to the commentary tradition of al-Baghawī's Maṣābīḥ al-sunna. It's a pleasure today to have Dr. Brinkmann with us. Her talk is titled Tracing a Forgotten Tradition, Commentaries written on al-Baghawī's post-canonical hadith collection, Maṣābīḥ al-sunna. Dr. Brinkmann, the floor is yours if you'd like to share your screen.
Thank you very much, Hadel, for this kind introduction and for the occasion to present a paper in your lecture series, and a warm hello to the audience that I unfortunately can't see, but anyhow. So having the 2 words of commentary and hadith in the title, I thought might scare off some people, but I will try to limit the content-related aspects of hadith and hadith commentary to a minimum. That is the information necessary to understand the type of hadith collection and the type of commentaries, since this has, of course, an impact on how, possibly who, when, and where these texts were used and studied. I would also like to exploit the occasion of this lecture to discuss with you my ongoing research that Hadel Jarada just presented, and ask you for critical thoughts. I have to stress that this case study is work in progress. There will be many buts and ifs and don't know yet, so just to prepare you for that. So in the following, I will present the halfway forgotten commentary tradition of the Hadith collection Maṣābīḥ al-sunna, compiled in the early 12th century in Khurasan by the Shafi'i legal scholar, the Mufassir and Muhaddith al-Ḥusayn ibn Masʿūd al-Baghawī. He died in 1122. First, I will briefly introduce again this Hadith collection and the types of commentaries. In a second step, I will trace the production and transmission of the commentaries with different sources as some kind of rough thread through the lecture. Doing so, I will start with a bird's eye view, mapping the larger picture of commentary and manuscript production before zooming in on one specific commentator from 13th century Shiraz and Kerman. At the end, I will very briefly summarize my preliminary observations and share some thoughts with you about the possible reasons for the decrease and neglect of the Maṣābīḥ commentary tradition. So while al-Baghawi's hadith collection is still known and read today, even though neglected in research, its commentary tradition nearly completely fell into oblivion, despite the roughly 50 commentaries in the widest sense that sources do register. Actually, the numbers range from 17 commentaries to 50. Only 4 of these roughly 50 known texts have been edited so far, a 5th one in 2 fragmentary editions in 2 master theses from Saudi Arabia, and a 6th one, an Ottoman one, in 2 lithographs from India around the year 1900. Al-Baghawi's Maṣābīḥ al-Sunna is a so-called secondary digest collection. What does secondary mean here? A collection, a primary collection for which the compiler still had a personal, a living isnad to the Prophet or a companion. So the Sunni canonical collections, pre-canonical ones, etc., they're all primary collections. A secondary hadith collection does select traditions from previous primary hadith collections, rearranges them, and edits them as a new hadith collection. And the compiler does not possess any longer a living personal isnad. These hadith collections could be encompassing and comprehensive. They're really enormous meta collections, but they could also be condensed and concise, the so-called digest collections. Exactly. So the term digest indicates 2 things when it comes to al-Baghawi's Maṣābīḥ. First, it is a selection of best of, or the most essential in the eyes of al-Baghawi, of course, and it still contains 4,500 traditions. Al-Baghawi has chosen these traditions from the 6 canonical collections and the Sunan of Darimi. He does not specify in his collection from which compilations he has chosen the relevant hadiths. The only exception is that he has a Sahih section, and these hadiths are only taken from Bukhari and Muslim. And you will see in some of the manuscripts that the copyist or a later scribe has used some kind of sigla system, the one that you see here on the folio, in order to make clear in which of the primary collections you actually can find a specific hadith. Second, al-Baghawi truncated the long isnads down to the Prophet or a companion. So the Maṣābīḥ was hence some kind of an essential handbook, a hadith collection that had compendium character without too many hadith technicalities such as the isnad. It was used, as we know, through isnads and mashyakhat, etc., by professional hadith scholars, but it also surely had another type of audience, hadith students, jurists that simply needed key traditions for their legal reasoning, but also a better educated lay public. This compendium character seems to me a central reason why the Maṣābīḥ collection, but also its commentaries, were popular, especially in specific regions and at specific times, namely the non-Arab regions under Mongol, post-Mongol, and Ottoman rule. I should add at this point that roughly 200 years after al-Baghawi, another scholar, al-Khatib at-Tabrizi, took the Maṣābīḥ, revised it, added another approximately 1,500 traditions to it, and called it Mishkat al-Maṣābīḥ. So this collection is studied up to our days in India and has brought forth its own commentary tradition with Persian and Urdu commentaries roughly from the 17th century on. I only want to stress at this point, I'm not including the Mishkat tradition. I will just briefly mention it at the end again. When we look at the commentaries written on the Maṣābīḥ, let me first clarify what I mean with commentary in the widest sense. Most commentaries are proper commentaries of the sharh type, you know that, but I also include gharib al-hadith works, takhrij, again, those works that try to reconstruct from which collections a specific hadith has been taken or quoted, works on the transmitters, there was one work actually on weak hadith and a super commentaries and a majlis style commentary. So these are all commentaries for me. The proper sharh commentaries are usually of a medium size, so they're not too extensive. And most manuscripts range from roughly 200 to 400 folios. Of course, it depends on the format and the number of lines. And down here on the slide, you see 3 examples. That's how many of the Sharh manuscripts look like. So they're not Fath al-Baris, these huge ones. They're, yeah, as I said, smaller ones, condensed ones. Generally said, the Sharh type commentaries have a clear focus on the explanation of content. They are scholarly works, but many of them do not specifically or at length dwell upon hadith technicalities such as isnad criticism, variants, different transmission lines, etc. But they really try to convey what is said in the content, so in the text. And this is why there is also a stress on lexicography often. In addition, some of them have, often as part of the preface, some kind of basic introduction to hadith terminology, a very short essential handbook. Having said that, it becomes clear that both, again, the Maṣābīḥ, but also the commentaries were read by professional scholars, yes, but they were also to a large extent directed at a non-specialized audience, possibly partly a non-Arab audience, having some kind of introductive character. When it comes to the numbers preserved of these commentaries, the commentary manuscripts, you see that many have been preserved, but in 1 up to 3 manuscripts. These numbers are taken from the catalog Fihris Shamil. The catalog was published in 1991 to 92, so it's definitely outdated. And just cross-checking certain titles with the Iranian meta-catalog Fancha has shown many more manuscripts, but I think it's more consistent for this lecture also that I stick to one source. So the numbers of manuscripts are all taken from the Fihris Shamil. And you see that there are a few ones that are better preserved. That is the one from Turan Pushti or Tur-Bushti, as he's often called, with 22 manuscripts, al-Baghawī, Ibn Malak, Musar ad-Din, and Zayn al-Arab. And these are all commentaries from the 13th, 14th, and one from the 15th century. Let me briefly show you now what I take into consideration to trace this commentary tradition. And all this is not new. It simply shows the combination of narrative sources, manuscript catalog data, and the analysis of the physical manuscripts, an approach typical for the Bibliotheca Arabica project. And I will try, Bruno, if you don't mind. Yes, now it works again, okay. So let's start with data and statistics and the narrative sources. So data and statistics do possibly not sound exciting to many, but I think that it is a puzzle piece of the wider framework of transmission that we should take into consideration. With data, I mean, for example, the sheer number of manuscripts that has survived of a work. Thinking of quantity and numbers, we easily argue that many copies of a work imply its popularity in the past. On the other hand, we all know that even those works, of which we only have a few manuscripts preserved, might actually have been popular and widely circulating in the past. So we have, generally said, certain numbers at hand, certain data at hand, and I think we have to reflect also from a statistical perspective what informative value we assign to such numbers, and we need other parameters, I think, to support such numbers. When it comes to the narrative sources, we are in the fortunate situation to have huge data repositories of text available, such as the OpenITI, that allow us to search for the mention of a specific author or work in later texts. So the OpenITI might have its limitations, it's only Arabic text, but still it's a huge amount of data to trace the transmission of an author or a work. In my own research, I have not yet carried out a systematic search for the names of my commentators and the titles in the OpenITI, but I hope I will be able to do so in the future. Despite the potentially lost books, the following numbers, again, might give an impression of the popularity of the Maṣābīḥ al-Sunnah. The Fihris Shamil lists 2,327 manuscripts preserved worldwide of Bukhari Sahih. Again, the numbers will be higher, but these are the numbers taken from the Fihris. Muslim Sahih preserved in 532 manuscript copies, then Ibn Majah and Abu Dawud Sunan from 100 to 160 roughly, and al-Baghawi's Maṣābīḥ al-Sunnah in 523 numbers, also so nearly equal to Muslim. Connecting now such numbers to another parameter, in this case, a historical library catalogue, we see that in the library of the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid II, al-Baghawi's Maṣābīḥ al-Sunnah ranges in terms of manuscript numbers on place 2, directly after al-Bukhari's Sahih. And as we will see, Bukhari was very popular in the Ottoman Empire. For the next slide, I excuse myself, this is not a mathematical piece of art. So the numbers basically do indicate the centuries. The larger the font, the more manuscript copies have been preserved, or we know of, or the more commentaries have been produced. So having a number of vagaries in mind, I mean, many manuscripts are not dated at all. I have only limited access to commentary catalogs and to manuscripts. But these numbers tell us that by far most copies of the Maṣābīḥ have been preserved from the 14th, 15th, and then the 18th century, and only slightly less from the 13th and 17th century. The most productive period of the manuscript production of the commentaries is also the 13th to the 15th century. And that is also the period when most Sharh commentaries were written. Only very few of these 13th to 15th century commentaries seem to have been copied throughout the centuries. I found a few copied in the 18th and 19th century, like Musar al-Din or Zayn al-Arab, but it seems that many of them have been preserved only in these earlier copies. The dated copies from the 17th and the 18th century are mainly copies from the Ottoman commentary of 17th century al-Ḥusayn. If we now look at the level of the production and the regions of the production of the commentaries, I have to leave the PowerPoint and switch to this map. And this map has been prepared by my colleague Daniel Kienitz on the basis of my data, so thank you to Daniel. So if we look now at the 6th to the 7th century, that is the 12th to the 13th century, we clearly see the starting point of commentary production in Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and Syria. The one in Egypt is misleading. The commentator is born in Egypt, but he settled in Syria. And I should add at the very beginning that Egypt does not really play a role in the Maṣābīḥ commentary tradition. Hence, this setting, this early setting, reflects a pre-Mongol and Mongol context. This regional focus continues in the 14th to the 15th century, but we also see that we move towards the west and more into Syria and Anatolia getting more present. Again, here it's misleading that Cairo is important. There are actually only 4 commentaries known to me of commentators who came from Egypt and settled in Egypt and wrote the commentary in Egypt, and from the 14th and 15th century. The impression is misleading because this map includes biographical information when scholars traveled to a certain destination. And of course, in the 15th century, many scholars traveled to Cairo. Moving on to the 17th century, we see more activity in the Ottoman Empire and actually one Maliki commentator from the Maghreb. All the other ones are Hanafi and Shafi'i. And we also see that the 16th century is basically poorly represented in terms of commentary production, but apparently also manuscript copy production. To summarize, having in mind the potential loss of books and the lack of information, it seems that the 13th to the 15th centuries were the most productive centuries for the production of the commentaries of the Maṣābīḥ, with a clear peak actually in the 14th century. And this graph shows the production of the commentaries, and I should add that the most eminent commentaries, of which we also have most manuscripts preserved today, are 13th to early 14th century. And this runs parallel again to the most productive period for the manuscript copies of these commentaries, but also the copies of the Maṣābīḥ, al-sunna collection. The Center for the Production of Commentaries, possibly also the copying, but this is really something I can't tell yet, is 13th to 14th century, Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, as well as some production in Mamluk Syria. And the next productive period, again, is the Ottoman Empire, Anatolia, Istanbul, above all in the 17th and 18th century. Coming to super commentaries and translations, there is actually not a lot to say about this. The Maṣābīḥ commentary tradition is not part of what some have labeled a gloss tradition. So there is a commentary and a super commentary on the commentary, and there is a commentary on the super commentary, an abridgment of the super commentary, etc. So we don't have this in the Maṣābīḥ commentary tradition. There is actually one super commentary on the Ibn Malak's 15th century commentary. There is another one that collects material from other commentaries. But again, it does not have this growth of commentaries, this Maṣābīḥ commentary tradition. This can be an indication for the fact that the Maṣābīḥ commentaries possibly never became part of a curriculum, and I will come back to that point at the end of my talk. There are also no translations of the commentaries known to me. The next issue I looked at are the marginal commentaries. So with marginal commentaries, I imply usually the non-documentary interlinear or marginal notes that explain or illustrate or extend a word or a passage in the main text. And roughly one can distinguish between a personal genuine remark by the user, the scribe or any user, but the majority of these annotations are citations from already existing standalone works, often commentaries, but also lexicographical works, dictionaries, tafsir, and many other genres. Hence, these entries are crucial to investigate how the main text was studied. And by identifying citations from other works in the margin, we can also reconstruct texts that circulated at a given time, at a given place, hence what texts have been transmitted. The difficulty in working with these texts is that the vast majority is anonymous. So we neither don't know the scribe nor actually the source of the citation. And if you look here to the left example, you will see here Muthir. And in fact, these are quotations from the commentary of Muthir-ud-Din Zaydani, but very often we do not have such an indication from which commentary the citation is taken. Now, I conducted a case study with 10 manuscripts that were copied between the 13th and 16th century, in which the Maṣābīḥ al-sunna was the main text. And I wanted to see with which commentaries the Maṣābīḥ was studied. The result of this case study was that by far most marginal commentaries that I could identify were from the 13th to the 15th century commentary tradition. An addition, again, from those commentaries of which we have most copies today. The majority was cited from these proper Mongol and post-Mongol Maṣābīḥ commentaries from Turan Pushti, Musaruddin, and Zayn al-Arab, but also Ibn Malik, and also from the less preserved Syrian commentators al-Fuqai and al-Sukhumi. I also cross-checked 3 later Ottoman commentaries, but could not identify any citation of them in the margins of these Maṣābīḥ manuscripts. Now again, I'm sorry, I can't. And with this in mind, I zoom now in on one author taking one manuscript and its documentary entries and some narrative sources as main source. As it is well known, ḥadīth scholars developed mechanisms to secure the proper transmission of texts, a transmission that had a very strong oral component. Hence, audition entries, the sama'at and the certificates, the ijazat, have the names of the participants, the date, the place, the text that were had, and all these authoritative lines of transmission. So obviously, such entries can tell us something about the texts that were studied at a given time, in a given place, long after the texts that were studied were composed. Scholars could also compile lists of books they studied. So they would list the titles and authors of those books, and then the shuyukh they studied these texts with. So there are different names for this, mashayikha or barnamij or thabat, but I mean, the intention is all the same. As the ijazat and sama'at, these mashayikhat are a treasure trove to trace transmission, of course, not only in the sense of texts that were still studied at a later time, but also when, where, and especially with whom. Only comparatively few of these sources have been edited and made accessible. Hence, there is really a massive body of literature out there that awaits research. And I'm very thankful that some colleagues have embarked on the mission to collect and publish this data. Let me show you now a few examples of such documentary notes and reference works that help reconstructing the biography of a Maṣābīḥ commentator and his commentary. In the year 682, that is 1283, described Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr ibn Jalal with the laqab Jamal al-Isfahani, finished a copy of Maṣābīḥ al-sunna. No place is given. The manuscript is today kept at the Bibliothèque Nationale on the shelf Gallica 6606 and is the one that you see. I only have this microfilm copy. I'm sorry for that. This manuscript has marginal commentaries from a number of known commentators, but also annotations that I could not at all identify by comparing them to my commentary manuscripts. But a collation note beside the colophon tells us that a certain Shihabuddin, etc., Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Mahmud al-Yazdi, you see him here, had a copy of the Maṣābīḥ that served as Vorlage, that he corrected, among others, this manuscript at the Gallica 6606. And that many, and that was interesting for me, that many Hawashi here were written by him. So such an entry is an exception, not the rule, but I was happy to find it. Now, I could identify some of the marginal commentaries in this manuscript as citations from a commentary called Al-Muyassar Sharh Maṣābīḥ al-Sunna, written by a scholar who's called in the modern edition At-Turi Bushti. The Fiqh Shamil lists 22 manuscripts of this commentary, Al-Muyassar. It is hence one of the better preserved ones. Who now was this commentator? And what information can the manuscript Gallica 6606 offer? All in all, we know very little about this author. He was contemporary to the Mongol conquest of Iran and Baghdad and died in the year 661, that is 1263. Tracing him can be a challenge due to the many name variants found in manuscripts and narrative sources. And I'm not going through them, but you have them here on the slide. So despite the many Arabicized name variants, we can assume that this commentator came from the town of Turan Pusht in the vicinity of Yazd. The name variant that refers to this place is already visible in the Persian 15th century historical work Mujmal al-Fasih, where the commentator is called Shihabul Millah wa Din Fadlallah Turan Pushti. That the Nisba Turan Pushti does not refer to a homonymous place is confirmed by mention of the commentator in Munshi Kermani Simt al-Ula. Here he is simply called Fadlallah Turan Pushti Yazdi. Nothing is known about his birth or childhood, apart from the fact that he obviously came from the region of Yazd. He appears as one of the scholars and notables active in 13th century Shiraz under Salghurid rule, namely under Abu Bakr ibn Sa'ad's rule. Shiraz was saved from destruction since Abu Bakr sent his nephew or brother to the Mongol army, offering submission to the new rulers. In fact, Shiraz experienced a prosperous cultural period under Abu Bakr. So Turan Pushti was in a way contemporary to Sa'di, but also to Abdullah al-Baydawi's father, who by that time was Qadi al-Qudat in Shiraz. And that's the region he came from. That's the region we move in the moment. Arabic sources offer only scarce information and exclusively connect Turan Pushti to Shiraz. In the Arabic sources and reference works, he's only min Ahl Shiraz, if they refer at all to him. So in Dhahabi, Siyar, or the Tazkira, or in Ibn Hajar's Ad-Durar al-Kamina, he is not mentioned at all. There is no entry on him. It is the Persian historical sources that inform us that the female Parachitai ruler, Qutluq Terken Khatun, had called him to Kerman in the year 656, that is 1258, to teach at her newly established madrasa. Qutluq Terken Khatun ruled in Kerman from 1257 to 1282, hence 26 years. She's one of these eminent female Mongol rulers. Turan Pushti died in Kerman in 661, 1263, as I already said. And in some of the manuscripts of his commentary, it is noted that he finished his commentary in the year 660. So he definitely started the commentary in Shiraz and he finished it in Kerman a year before he passed away. 5 publications are known of him, written in Arabic and Persian, the commentary being the best preserved one. Now, it is difficult to judge Turan Pushti's popularity. He's mentioned as known scholar of Shiraz and was surely not called to Kerman without reason. And he appears in some scholarly isnads in the connection to some historical events, and a few Persian historical sources, again like the Mujmal al-Fasih or the Simt al-Ula, have some information about his sons. They're giving the names of the 3 sons, and also the information that he had a daughter whose name remains unknown. She's simply Dokhtar, but I will come briefly back to her later on. Means basically we have to collect the bits and pieces to trace the biography and the transmission of the commentary of this author. Now, as we have seen, a scholar called Ahmad ibn Muhammad al-Yazdi had a copy of the Maṣābīḥ that served for the collation of Gallica 6606. Furthermore, we got to know that he checked or corrected this manuscript Gallica 6606 and that he added many marginal notes. But we also get to know that Ahmad al-Yazdi heard the hadith collection Maṣābīḥ al-sunna from Turan Pushti himself. So the relevant information is given in a 2-page ijaza entry at the end of the Gallica 6606 manuscript. And I should possibly add that the page you see now is the recto, and the opposite is the verso page, of course, where the whole ijaza entry starts. So that is not copied, you can't see it. First, al-Yazdi notes, again on the verso side, you can't see, I'm sorry, a number of named scholars who heard the Maṣābīḥ that was recited in front of him. Then he starts to issue the ijazat, specifying always his own authority to transmit the Maṣābīḥ. On the recto side, the one that you can see, we read that he has the authority through his own audition, sama, with his Shaykh, Shihab al-Millah wa Din, etc. And here it comes, Fadlallah, Ibn al-Hasan, Ibn al-Ḥusayn, al-Tura Pushti. This is not a noon, it must be read Tura Pushti. Through the recitation of his brother during the year 600, and here we have the year 655, that is in the year 1257. No place is given. Shiraz might be an option, because as mentioned earlier, the female ruler Qutluq Terken Khatun called Turan Pushti in the year 1258 from Shiraz to Kerman, roughly a year after this audition apparently took place with Ahmad al-Yazdi. Among the sources of authority for Turan Pushti himself to transmit the Maṣābīḥ is his father, here, Tajuddin, Abu Sa'id al-Hasan, etc., of Turan Pushti. And in fact, Turan Pushti names his father as source of transmission several times in his own commentary. Ahmad Muhammad al-Yazdi, again, who heard the Maṣābīḥ from Turan Pushti in the year 1257, issued the Sama' Ijaza in the year 1301, the year 700. And you see his name down here. And here you can possibly read the year 700. the possible mention of a place is lost due to the cropping of the margins. So having biographical information and documentary evidence at hand, we can reconstruct so far the regions of Shiraz, Kerman, and possibly Yazd as a region where Turan Pushti's transmission of the Maṣābīḥ and most likely also his commentary was known. Now, what about other places? In the 14th century, the Hadith scholar Abu Hafs Omar al-Qazwini reveals in his Mashyakha that he had heard all works of Fadlallah al-Turbushti, that's how he calls him in the Mashyakha, such as his Sharh al-Maṣābīḥ, together with Turan Pushti's line of transmission. Al-Qazwini also names the scholar who issued this ijazah for the transmission, a certain Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Abi Qasim al-Muqri. Now, the interesting thing is that al-Qazwini himself wrote a commentary on weak hadith in the Maṣābīḥ, al-Sunnah. Al-Qazwini was born in Qazvin, then moved to Wasit, but he was above all active in Baghdad. So information such as this in the Mashyakha of al-Qazwini can give evidence for the circulation of Turan Pushti's works. And it is interesting, he says all works, that means the Persian and the Arabic ones, in Baghdad. But until today, there is neither evidence that Turan Pushti was actually physically ever in Baghdad, nor that he performed the Hajj. But there is another link that connects Turan Pushti to a famous figure of Baghdad. And this connection adds to our knowledge that Turan Pushti had Sufi affiliation. This is nothing uncommon for the time, but of course it's always interesting with regard to the school of thought he might have belonged to. This link connects Turan Pushti to the famous Sufi sheikh in Baghdad, namely Shihabuddin Omar al-Suhrawardi. This link can be found in a biographical entry in Sakhawi's Daw' al-Lami. The entry is dedicated to another person, but as-Sakhawi mentions a line of authority for the bestowal of the Sufi khirqa, for the spiritual path, and he gives this line as follows. He, Abdurrahim, that is the subject of the entry, received the khirqa from Nur Muhammad on the authority of Al-Majd ibn Shihab Fadlallah Turabushti, on the authority of his father from Suhrawardi. This entry now gives evidence for a connection between the known Sufi Shaykh Omar al-Suhrawardi and our commentator Fadlallah Turan Pushti. So Turan Pushti received the khirqa from Suhrawardi, transferred it to his son Al-Majd, who transferred it further. So why is this connection interesting and important? One thing is we know that Turan Pushti had some kind of affiliation or connection to Omar's school of thought, but there is more. Omar al-Suhrawardi came to Baghdad to study with his uncle, also a famous Sufi scholar, Abd al-Qahir al-Suhrawardi. Abd al-Qahir taught at the Nizamiya, but also in his own Ribad. What is important is that the first commentary ever written on the Maṣābīḥ al-Sunnah we know of has been written by Abd al-Qahir al-Suhrawardi, and it is a Gharib al-Hadith commentary called Gharib al-Maṣābīḥ. There is only one manuscript known today, kept at the Zahiriya library, and unfortunately, it is still inaccessible to me. Anyhow, Abd al-Qahir knew the Maṣābīḥ and wrote the Gharib commentary on it. And we can assume that he also taught this hadith connection to his nephew, Omar al-Suhrawardi, who in return had some kind of connection to Turan Pushti. That the uncle Abd al-Qahir introduced his nephew Omar to al-Baghawi's Maṣābīḥ al-Sunnah does not only seem obvious, taking again that he has written a commentary on it and that he taught his nephew, but we also get further evidence in entries such as the following Sama'. And here we come back to our manuscript Gallica 6606. Here, a number of named scholars heard al-Baghawi's Maṣābīḥ al-Sunnah from the scribe of the entry, a certain Abdullah Muhammad ibn Mahmud, etc., known as Rukn al-Mujawir here, namely in Mecca. What follows is also a line of authority for Rukn al-Mujawir. We also get a date that is the year 758 when the audition takes place in Mina, east of Mecca, at the first pillar for the stoning of the devil. So the silsila of this scribe runs via a person called Abu Abdallah Muhammad ibn Abi Qasim Abdallah al-Mukri, and from here via Umar Muhammad al-Suhrawardi and Abdul Qahir al-Suhrawardi. And I should add again that Abil Qasim al-Mukri is exactly the same scholar who taught Turan Pushti's works to the Baghdadi scholar al-Qazvini. Hence, this Sama entry confirms the transmission of the Maṣābīḥ from Abd al-Qahir to his nephew Suhrawardi, and the scholarly isnad contains further the scholar Abil Qasim al-Mukri. We also see that Baghawi's Maṣābīḥ was recited in Mecca. That the Maṣābīḥ, and with it parts of its commentary tradition, made their way to Mecca and Medina, but Mecca here, also becomes evident in a biographical note in the biographical dictionary Al-Kawakib al-Sa'ira, written by the Ottoman scholar Najmuddin al-Ghazi. The subject of this entry is a person called Mahmud Shirazi, who later on settled in Damascus. And the only further biographical information we get is that he performed the Hajj in the year 940, that is 1533 to 34. Al-Ghazi, though, points out to a manuscript that Mahmud carried with him, namely a copy of the Maṣābīḥ with notes of 12 authors in the margins. And even though Al-Ghazi mixes at times authors and titles, there are actually 3 titles in this list, the list is highly interesting because it contains Central Mongol and post-Mongol commentators of the Maṣābīḥ, such as Musairuddin, al-Baghawī, Zainul Arab, and Turan Pushti. Interesting too is Al-Ghazi's comment on this manuscript and the commentators that appear in citations on the margins. He states that these works are from the Biladul Akrad, hence Iran, Iraq, into Turkey, and that they're only known to a very limited extent in the lands of the Arabs. I come to the end now. It is the interplay of different sources that allows us to trace the production and transmission of authors' works or a cluster of works. And this is, as I said in the beginning, also the approach taken by the Bibliotheca Arabica project, where we develop a database that connects manuscript catalog data, biobibliographical works with ijazat, sama'at, and manuscript notes, such as owners' and readers' notes. And as we see, we can, with all these sources taken together, tentatively and cautiously map the production and transmission of the Maṣābīḥ commentary tradition. Now, why has the Maṣābīḥ commentary production decreased after the Mongol and post-Mongol period? So these are just a number of suggestions and ideas. I just cast them out into the open. They're not all really thought through, but things that come to my mind, and I would like to discuss that with you. So surely one reason for the decrease is the Safavid Empire in the 16th century and the politics of Shiitization. But second, what role do centers play? So as Baghdad, Cairo, and Istanbul were in a way fields of gravitation for scholarship during the Abbasid, Mamluk, or Ottoman period, the commentary tradition of the Maṣābīḥ happened in a rather decentralized context. So maybe there was Tabriz as a new capital, but it never had this centralizing cultural power. So in a way, the commentary tradition of the Maṣābīḥ reflects the multiple centers of the Mongol and post-Mongol period. And I wonder if such contexts in principle are more vulnerable in terms of transmission. Third, as far as I can tell, the commentaries never became part of a curriculum. I had already addressed that. There was not this growth of commentary and super commentary literature. And maybe that secures also, of course, the survival of a work becoming part of a curriculum. Fourth, and now we get more into the genre of commentary. Some hadith commentaries extensively refer to other scholars, other works, and their opinions, and they would discuss them. Now, the Maṣābīḥ commentary tradition does that, but to a very, very little extent. And I wonder in how far these eminent hadith commentaries that have it's like a small library within the commentary, and how far that also adds to the chance to be transmitted further. The last issue to be mentioned is the strong claim by professional Mamluk, especially Egyptian hadith scholars, that if one wants to do serious hadith studies, you should study the canonical works and some other primary study collections, and you should study some key works of the field of hadith sciences, ulum al-hadith. And for example, a scholar like the Subki said, whoever studies hadith and reads and studies al-Baghawī's Maṣābīḥ al-sunna or Saghani's Mishkat al-Anwar and thinks he would do serious hadith studies is a fool and an ignorant. And maybe the strong impetus of the Egyptian Mamluk hadith scholarship that through the transfer also of the manuscripts to the Ottoman Empire had an enormous influence also on European scholarship. I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions.